Welcome to the Healthier Tech Podcast, the show about building a healthier relationship with modern technology. Now, here are your hosts, R. Blank and Stephanie Warner.
When it comes to practicing self-mastery and becoming the best version of yourself, today's guest, Neal Conlon, can not only help you find your inner voice, but will empower you to take the needed action steps to better yourself, find your purpose, and stop the steps so many people are taking towards mediocrity. Let's take a dive into health, wellness, and a better you with today's guest. Welcome, Neal Conlon, to the Healthier Tech Podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Before we get into the meat, just to start us off, I want to hear about your experience roasting coffee.
I love it. Go right for the beans, pun intended. I became fascinated with coffee for a long time. Like, I'm just a coffee drinker. But really the way that the coffee thing started was I started to recognize how like lots of military veterans come out of the military, because I'm a military veteran, and have a hard time taking the uniform off. And I, as somebody who, when I got out of the military, I was frustrated with the fact that I got out of the military because the civilian world didn't have the camaraderie, the team building, the purpose, the mission, and I threw it in the closet and didn't touch it for years. And then I finally kind of took it back out of the closet, metaphorically, of course, and then started to get at that point, I was already an entrepreneur doing all these things. And I really felt a lot of empathy for all these, they even call it veteranpreneurs now, who come out of the military and create these veteran brands. And while I think it's a very awesome, powerful thing, it's like, in my head, how many more camouflage things do we need in the civilian world? Like, here's a beer opener, that was a grenade. Here's a bullet, that's a knife. And it's just like, I just couldn't, I wanted to demonstrate how easy it is that with the right mindset, you can make a lot of money doing everything and anything. And so I love coffee. I reached out to a fellow veteran of mine who was roasting coffee, and I said, I have this great idea. I want to create a white label coffee bean that is veteran from end to end. I want to white label it with a non-veteran brand, my own personal brand, which is Press Forward. And then for any time a veteran wants to know how they can make money, I'll give you the whole entire process for free. I'll show you the Excel sheet. I'll show you the cost. I'll show you the margins. I'll show you exactly how to do it, so you don't have to build another crappy camouflage widget. And that's how I started doing Press Forward Coffee. It was totally just like out of a need to help somebody else.
That's cool.
That's really amazing. Really amazing. My father is a veteran, so I appreciate that. I really appreciate the work that you're doing to help support veterans as they deal with civilian life, and really importantly, as enabling and empowering people, anyone, and especially veterans, to build their own businesses. I think that's really admirable, and I appreciate that work. Thank you.
Thanks. It's important.
It is very important. Yeah. Sorry,
So
I cut you off, Art.
No, that was cool. That was cool. So you brought up Press Forward, and I want to ask about that. But before, just because most people will be listening to this, not watching it, so they're not really getting the same kind of full visual that Steph and I are getting, right? So we're looking at one of the most amazing beards on the planet, lots of ink, and a tremendous smile. And I feel like that whole vibe is infused in, I mean, every piece of content of yours that I've had the chance to see so far. How did you get into this world of mental fitness?
Yeah, it's been a journey. The 2, maybe 3 minutes version of it is, when I first came out of the military, I really struggled with my identity afterwards, right? You spend this duration of time this great purpose, this great mission. And then when it's over, it's just done, right? And there's not a lot of programs to help you mentally and emotionally. Um, but they give you amazing skills, tactics, strategies, leadership principles, all this stuff. And little by little, I kind of rebuilt my entire identity and was fully invested in becoming an entrepreneur and becoming successful and traveling all around the world. And I realized I had built a whole bunch of muscles and skills that allowed me to be able to do these things that most people, the average person, is probably just not capable of. And I just mean that from like, I'm not some superhero. I mean, most of it was I was in the right place at the right time. And I had a little bit of background in resilience from the military. I'd been in some really uncomfortable places that the average citizen would buckle at. So when times get hard, most military veterans dig our feet in, and do better. Like, we thrive well in chaos. And that served me well for a long time. But then ultimately, during peace times, in military jargon, that's when veterans, military folks, we go crazy. Like, we don't have a problem to solve. We don't have a mission. We don't have a purpose. And to be honest and open and vulnerable, there's a couple times in businesses where I kind of went off the rails. And I suffered for it, and people that I worked with suffered for it. My family suffered for it. And I did for about 5 years, I did a whole bunch of personal development work, mindset work, spiritual work, metaphysical work. And when COVID came, I was like super excited. And I actually went through a period of time where I was super guilty, like May, June of 2020, when things are closing down, people are missing money, people are missing the office, people are anxious. I mean, like, I was loving life and I was feeling super guilty about it. And I was running these in-person men's weekends where guys could come, and I would create a framework and a structure and a container so that we can do some, get out of your head work. And I started to realize, like, as I'm watching, to paint you a picture, like, I'm watching all these guys who are, heads of the household, dads, fathers, used to running to the office every day, finding their identity in all these different things, that are really struggling about it. And I was great. And I started to really think about what it was that I was so great and they weren't. It wasn't my financial status. It wasn't my relationship status. It wasn't my health status. It was that I was more mentally fit at that point. And I really started to take that apart and build it into, like, what is it that Neal has done to make him so prepared for this thing? And I cannot, and this is where I started to realize that it's not about mental health in itself. I think is a challenge because it actually implies you have a problem, versus like mental fitness. Like, I say to a lot of people I work with nowadays, my girlfriend and my partner just finished running an Ironman and last week in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She did this amazing job, trained for a year for it. And what I thought was powerful, weird, and funny about her running the Ironman, and she's a very athletic woman, is that you can basically go to www.ironmantraining.com or whatever the website really is. And 35 weeks out, they will paint every calorie, every workout, every stretch, everything that you need to do in order for you to run an Ironman. You could be anybody. And so to just take that further for a second, when I'm at the Ironman 2 weeks ago in Coeur d'Alene, of course, the top 100 people look like cyborgs, right? Every muscle is chiseled. They've got $50,000 bikes. Bikes go by you. It's like, right? And people are the people that swim are like dolphins, the runners are like road runners. You're like, these people are superheroes. And that's the top 100. Now 4,000 people run this thing. There was a dude who was like 280 pounds and like 5'8", and dude was trucking along doing the Ironman. There was women in wheelchair devices doing the Iron. Like anybody can do the Ironman. It's all about mental fitness, and it really is. It's about. It really has taken me this full spectrum of like, for being in these turbulent times. It's not about mental health. Mental health is a crutch, in my opinion. It becomes about, are you mentally fit enough to do the thing you want to do?
Got to say, because when I was looking you up, I saw a video of you, and I think it was from January 3rd, 2020, and you're talking about how excited you are for the year that's coming. And then I was like, I looked at the date, I'm like, wow, I bet things didn't play out quite the way he was expecting. And now to hear you talk about it on the other side, like, no, it was fantastic. It really worked well. That's not a perspective you hear, spoken about so openly these days about what happened in 2020. Before we get further on this, I think maybe this is a good time for, if you could tell the listeners just a little bit about what Press Forward is and what it does.
Yeah. So the infancy of the Press Forward as my personal brand is, I was struggling with this identity thing for years, and I had become pretty successful, done a whole bunch of things in startups, but was really like looking to like still be like, what's Neal's thing? What's his thing? And the beard, I didn't have the beard as long, didn't have all the tattoos, didn't have the teeth at that point, I think, the way they look now. And I actually paid a company to go through a personal branding exercise. And they took me through this crazy, expensive interview. You take all these quizzes, you do all these things. They paint this big, huge PowerPoint, 20-page PowerPoint for you of your strengths and your weaknesses and all these things. And they literally pulled me into a meeting after like 6 or 7 meetings, flipped on the old PowerPoint deck on the screen, and we're like, press forward. And then I took this deck around to a whole bunch of my friends and family, and everyone looked at it. They were like, yeah, this is you. Why are you surprised? And I was like, really? And they were like, this is you to a T. And so it started off being pre-COVID, being a men's group, men's community, whatever you want to call it, but weekly accountability calls, one-on-one coaching. Then it morphed into Press Forward coffee and Press Forward merchandise. Then a bunch of really strong women reached out and said, what about us? And so we then started Press Forward Women. So we now have a Press Forward Women's accountability group and one-on-one coaching. And then it turned into retreats. And now here in September, we will have our first Press Forward in-person conference.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Yeah. So I saw that you coming up in September. What Press Forward into Success is that?
Yeah. So it's where it's one of my kind of approaches to things is I always think that everything that I do is always only about 80% correct, complete. And that 20% is me to learn, because I always want to be the student. Like I don't even consider myself a coach. I consider myself more of a facilitator. And so Press Forward's framework initially started with kind of these 5 pillars. And the 5 pillars were, forgive the little military terms. First, you need to have some self-integrity with yourself. Like you really got to have hard moments with yourself and realize what it is that's holding you back from what you need to get to. To do that, you need to have some accountability in your life. So you need to have an accountability partner. You got to report to somebody, a coach, a facilitator, a buddy, whatever it is. That can be super uncomfortable. So you have to put yourself into uncomfortable circumstances. In order for you to do that, you will need to unpack your stuff. Right? You got to dig into the backpack a little bit and realize like this thing that you're holding on to may not serve you well. And the way that you do that, number 5, is through rituals and ceremonies. We now call those things habits and routines. Now, over time, it's evolved over the past 2 years into boiling it down to the 3, what I call cornerstones of Press Forward now, which is mental fitness, metaphysics, and resilience. And about 2 months ago, as I'm starting to work with all these different companies, I start to hear all these venture capital investors and private equity firms talking about how they're going to basically hedge their bets in their startups. And so they're pulling in all of these startups that I work with, I'm an advisor to a bunch of these startups. And every venture capital and private equity person's like, all right, we're predicting there's going to be this recession over the next 18 months. Do this with your hiring, do this with your accounting, do this with your bank accounts, do this with your people, do this with your contracts. And I kept on picking up this pulse of like what these companies are doing with the looming recession coming. And I felt really drawn to being like, you know what? I have kind of a fiduciary responsibility to take all these things that I'm learning, all the advice I'm doing with all these startups, and taking it not only to the men and women within my community, but also to other entrepreneurs and business owners and stuff like that. And so over the course of a weekend, me and my team got to the point where it was like, all right, now we're going to take all of this information and we're going to create a 3-day conference, and we're going to show people how they can press forward into success and how they can recession proof their business through mental fitness, metaphysics, and resilience.
So I want to approach that from a slightly different angle here. So I understand that among your primary interests, right, is science and technology. Is that fair?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I was wondering, what about technology interests you, and does that interest relate to your work with Press Forward?
1,000%. The reason why I have this, what's the word, appreciation for curiosity with tech, right? Especially with our health, right? And when I first started to get into taking better care of myself and my body, and actually even going down the spiritual path, right? I started to learn, I think a lot of people do this, right? We don't have all the answers, and so we go in different directions, and then we learn on spiritual stuff, and maybe we learn about plant medicine or herbs or botanicals and stuff like that. And I think all that stuff's great and powerful, and there's so much technology even in a lot of these plants and how we use them. However, let's just face it, thousands of years ago, the shaman didn't have a whoop.
What, he had an aura ring?
The shaman wasn't measuring lactic acid in your system. The shaman, wasn't checking blood sugar. So I walk very delicately on the intersection of like, we are on the brink of an amazing existence where we can now take this information through the various different health technology stuff that we can apply foundational technologies that were given to us holistically through the planet and really do amazing things.
So now this is where I want to take it back, because I think this relates directly to 2 of the 3 pillars you were talking about, right? Because you're focused on mental fitness and resilience. And based on my personal experience and the interviews that Steph and I have done on this podcast, we constantly see ways in which tech can help, and a lot of ways where it can, in particular, harm resilience and and mental fit. Well, I mean, we've used the term mental health, but in your case, mental fitness. And I think that I just wanted to take a moment to kind of hone in on what you were just talking about, right? Because I think you were getting to something that's really kind of essential to the goal of this podcast, right? Talking about this balance of where tech can help and this maybe over reliance or over focus on technology, right? So how do you see that balance actually? How do you see tech helping people, and how do you see it not helping people? Where is that line, or how do you go about even thinking about where that line is?
Yeah, I appreciate this, and I've been part of this conversation for quite some time, right? I've worked with numerous AI chat bot things and automations and all the things. And I think it's really, I mean, a piece of it is generational, just to be like depending on where you fell and where tech hit and what you're capable of. But there's really like just a mindset to it, like there's a mindset to, I'm just trying to think of a good example. I'll take a good real-time example. I came home from Montana last night, flipped open my computer this morning, and saw that my internet was broken. No internet at all. Routers read things on, and I'm just, the way I operate is like, what's the smart way to do this? And I immediately hop into a chat bot on my phone. The chat bot actually tells me to take a picture of the back of my router, and then you don't realize it, right? The WAN landline and the DSL are all different colors and circles, and the camera can actually pick up the colors and then told me what to do to troubleshoot the machine. And I literally was like, this is so impressive. This is technology.
I'm impressed.
Right now I share that because this is technology at the state of adoption. It took Verizon dozens of iterations of that to get there, and the iteration was, first you got a remote caller, then you got somebody in India, then you got a chat bot that didn't work, then you got a chat bot that didn't work, then you got a chat bot, and now you've got this thing. Right. And so I think like for people who don't recognize it, like a lot of the jobs and services that we have in our society were originally predicated on the ability for a human to do the same repetitious task over and over and over again. And we're in this beautiful, amazing place where like nobody should ever want, I'm going to say something a little abrupt. Nobody should ever want to be a cashier. Right? Now, if it was about hiring a 17, 18-year-old person to learn basic job skills so they could learn responsibility, integrity, and accountability, that was great in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. That time is very much gone. And I think we're in this beautiful place where people now have the ability to use technology as a tool. I always think about, like, to answer your question very directly, you should look at every piece of technology as this is just a tool to get me to do something better, quicker, faster. Right? Even in the world of social media, like I fundamentally took something that Gary Vaynerchuk taught me a long time ago and have lived with that in my head, is that everything that we put on social media, you are marketing something. That is the only thing social media does. So if you put Candy Crush on there all day long, or Farm Yard or Land or whatever,
Farmville, yeah,
you're just marketing it. You're just telling everybody what you're doing all day long.
That's a good point.
So does tech, I mean, do people's relationship with tech, does that factor into your coaching sessions or into this Press Forward event coming up in September? Is that something you focus on in terms of helping people achieve self-improvement and a better version of themselves?
Yeah, I am a firm believer that the you can do much, much more than you ever could in your life with less these days. Right. And I think that using technology to do so is amazing. And I think that, I also think that with that, you know, comes this idea of great. And this is like a big, huge challenge, I think, for people. Once you become more efficient, what the fudge do you do with all that time? And
Well,
and I
yeah.
think I think that's super important. So like, for me, it's a matter of like find then it allows you people who have never been able to find their purpose, people who have never been able to really take up hobbies, people who have never been able to explore something they actually love to do because they've been too busy, you know, feeling that they have to live a certain way, right? Like I recently even went through this experience where my girlfriend asked me if I could live anywhere if I could live anywhere in the world, where would I want to live? And I was so confused by this question because I've always lived where I needed to live out of necessity. I've always lived close to my family, close to my kids, close to where the business is. I've never been like, well, where would you live if you could live anywhere? And I think there are so many of us that just don't have enough time in the day for us to even ask ourselves those questions. And
Yeah.
so if you're an entrepreneur and you think that you need to hustle, grind it out, and get your kind of badge of courage and burn out just so you can realize that you shouldn't have burned yourself out, or that you didn't have to burn yourself out in order for you to be successful, that's not a badge of courage that I think people want to have anymore. And I think that with people doing this great exodus of leaving the workplace, there's nothing but opportunities for people to be healthier and use technology so that they can work a hard day and also be healthy about it.
I like that. I like that perspective. Just wondering, now that you've thought about it a little, do you know where in the world ideally you would want to live?
I am looking at Asheville, North Carolina at the moment. I very much
Which
like
is a
the
cute
mountains
place.
there.
I like Asheville.
And then ultimately, once my kids are a little bit older, I think Costa Rica's in the future.
Right on. Right on.
Not bad. Yeah, Monteverde is a pretty amazing place.
Yeah.
The work that you do is great, and I loved learning about that. But the perspective you brought to this question that I like asking in some form or another to everyone who comes on the show, I think that was it was both insightful and empowering, your approach to these questions on technology and in this case mental fitness and resilience. I really enjoyed learning about this from you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And like I think, you know, in the health tech space, I think there's just so much opportunity still. I mean, like we're learning so much about our bodies, and I think you know the COVID thing just really opened up a whole different conversation about how and what we need to do to take care of our bodies in meaningful ways. And everything from using whoop. I don't use a whoop personally, but I know many men in my community do, and they just swear by what they're able to do. I end up coaching a lot of athletes, who are constantly using it for recovery phases. Like again, we're in a place where people are not only thinking about muscle, like the repetitions of doing exercise, but actually thinking about what's the proper recovery time for things, right? Which is something we never knew before. And while I don't think there's any people at the actual Ironman, when I have run the New York City Marathon in the past, they have blind people now that can run the marathons where they wear these like glasses things that have a vibrating thing on their foreheads that helps steer them into, keep them on the course. And so there's this whole world that every time we figure out how to take somebody who used to have a disability and now solve that problem for them, you realize that they're actually more capable and more enabled than probably the average person, because they've had to train their senses. So now this person can see better or hear better than you, engage better with you more intentionally. Oh yeah, and they can run marathons when you can't do any of those three things. Like,
That's a really interesting perspective.
right, we're basically
Well, you've gone
making
from empowering to disempowering, Neil, pretty in the course of 2 minutes here.
yeah, and I'll give you one last one that I think is powerful, that's near and dear to my heart. Is I've worked with a company in the past that is a cybersecurity company that is military veterans, mostly Marines, I think, and people with autism. And they use technology, and they have given autistic men, mostly, I think it's all men, computers and a whole bunch of other tools, all tech stuff, and they use them to chase pedophiles online.
Oh, wow.
And they can do it better than anyone else. They will reverse engineer scenarios online to track these people down. And so these people with disabilities are now able to do something that no one else can do. And I think that and now every single time, now I know it's not health related, but I think about every single time that we learn how to take a disability and correct it, we now have something that can now be used holistically across the board for everybody else. And it's a very, very powerful conversation for people who focus on healthy tech, because it just becomes endless what you can do.
I could see where that branding company came in with the press forward deck for you. Like I can see where this whole approach is coming. I mean, it's innate in you. And no, but those are great examples. And yeah, I mean, here on the Healthier Tech podcast, we like to talk about issues about how tech might be not so great in our relationships with it, but it's also really important to focus on the ways in which it's improving our lives. Because to just talk about the phones are ruining our lives, it's simple-minded, and it's simple-minded to the point of being wrong, but it's also not helpful. It doesn't recognize. I mean, tech has done so much, obviously, to get society where it is today, that you can't just focus on the harms it's doing. You also have to appreciate the values that it's creating, across populations. And I think your examples were really illuminating.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the having the balance and not using it use it as a tool and not a crutch, even though you can look at it as a crutch as a tool, but I think you understand what I mean. But I think that's the important part of, and a lot of the examples that you used is you're showing these beautiful ways in which technology can make somebody more able. And we do talk a lot on this podcast about ways in which tech can be harmful. But I really love having you come in and sharing these ways and these examples of the ways in which technology can be really, really helpful for humanity. But also we have to use it as a foundation, as a core, and not become reliant upon it to satisfy life and to become too reliant.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And for some of the high performer types that I coach and have in my community, many of those people have done an amazing job at like streamlining and understand how to use the tech, right? And it's not so much about that satisfaction element, I think, is something that people have to be careful of, right? Now, there's all kinds of hacks and tactics that I've seen employed, but like I've seen people run their health so at such a granular level to where they have a Google Calendar of like, drink water at this point, take vitamins at this point, go for a walk at this point, go to my exercise at this point, take this supplement at this point, and have reminders in place so they can do these things. Whereas the average person will just go and spend $70-$80 on a supplement, throw it in the cabinet, spend $100 on the gym membership, and then neither do anything with either, after.
Do you find that, I like that example, and do you find though that sometimes too much information like that can actually be like paralysis, or perhaps you over over manage your like each little level to the point where you're not necessarily being more healthy? Have you seen that other side of managing your health to that such a micro level?
Well, I love this question. Even with, for example, a lot of the work that I've done in the world of plant medicine, right? There's this renaissance of plant medicine coming
Hmm.
forward with really great treatments around psilocybin and ketamine and San Pedro cactus and even ayahuasca. Um, I think we're at the intersection of defining the differences between what's a crutch and what is scaffolding for you changing the foundation of what you were taught. And just to expound on that for a second, it's like what people in my work, what I've started to pay attention to is that the different parts of our brain that create addiction, it's not like they were everything in our body is put there on purpose for a reason. And so this addiction mechanism is part of us. And I think that it is meant there. There's a whole different podcast we could do on why it's there. But I've paid close enough attention to it to recognize that there's that crutchiness, right? The reason why I'm doing the thing is because I don't have any other thing to do. So I'll do the thing, right? Which turns into smoking, drinking, opioids, right? It's the intention. I got nothing better to do, so I might as well get high or overeat or whatever the thing is. Now, I think we're at this evolution, though, where with technology, right, giving me some data, some analytics, a report, a notification, and a purpose, that we can now take that feeling that sometimes could feel crutchy and then turn it into scaffolding or training wheels that then once I master how to work with this thing, like my schedule being wrapped around my health, not my business, or a new supplement or exercise routine that gets me to operate in a certain way to prepare for a race, I can then take the scaffolding off of the foundation, because now through consistency, I've now created a new repetition and I now have a new routine in place that I will carry forward.
Yeah, I completely understand. I really like the scaffolding better than training wheels, but scaffolding that makes a lot of sense. It definitely does. Thank you.
So Neil, you've been super, super generous with your
Yes.
time, and I really appreciate you coming on the Healthier Tech podcast. Before we say goodbye, where would you like our listeners to go find and learn more about you?
Yeah. So on social media, my handles are at I am Neal Conlon, NEALCONLON, or you can check out my website at www.nealconlon.com.
Excellent. And we'll put all of that in the show notes. Yeah, again, man, thank you so much. This has been a great conversation. You've been super generous with your time, and I appreciate you making time right after a flight.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Healthier Tech Podcast. Remember to check the show notes for all the links and resources mentioned in the show. Please like and subscribe to the Healthier Tech Podcast on Apple, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice. Get your free quick start guide to building a healthier relationship with technology and our latest information at healthiertech.co.